Before we continue, this is part 2 of the story. If you haven't watched part 1, go back and start there so you don't miss how it all began. In the first part, an exiled healer broke her vow and used forbidden magic to save a dying werewolf pup she found beneath her bed, only to discover the pup belonged to the Alpha King himself. Now the bond between them is growing stronger. The palace is watching, and the council is ready to challenge her presence. Let's continue the story. Lord Corvus, Cale acknowledged. You have been busy these last days. Only as duty demands, Corvus replied smoothly. His gaze slid to me, cool and assessing. We felt your return, sire, and something else. I see now what it was. His attention snagged on the cub tucked against my chest. The little wolf was awake now, but quiet, eyes half-lidded, as if the sheer closeness of my heartbeat was enough to soothe him. This is the child? Corvus asked. My nephew, Cale said, a hint of warning beneath the words. Corvus inclined his head slightly. We are grateful he is found. Then, after a beat too long, and the healer? Not my name. Just a role wrapped in all the rumors they had gathered in my absence. Seraphine, Cale corrected, the word firm as a stone placed between us. She has agreed to help us understand what binds her to the cub. Of course, Corvus's politeness thinned at the edges. The council will wish to discuss the implications of that bond, and of her presence here. Later, Cale said. For now, she and the child need rest. A faint muscle jumped in Corvus's jaw, but he bowed. As you command, sire. We moved on. The corridors twisted like veins through the heart of the palace. Servants stepped quickly out of our way, eyes lowered, yet not blind. Snatches of murmured speculation trailed behind us. I caught fragments. Exiled, unnatural, king's pet, and tightened my hold on the cub until he grumbled in protest. Breathe, Cale said softly without looking back. You are not on trial here, Seraphine. Forgive me if it feels similar, I replied, equally quiet. He didn't argue. At last, we stopped before a carved wooden door painted with a running wolf and a crescent moon. Even before Cale opened it, I knew what room lay beyond. The air tasted of milk and sleep, of soft wool and lullabies long unsung. The nursery. The moment the door swung inward, the cub tensed. From inside came the thin, rasping cry I had grown used to hearing only in memory. It was deeper now, hoarser with overuse, filled with a raw edge of panic. In the cradle near the window, another cub thrashed, wrapped in my blanket. Not another, I realized with a jolt. The same. I had left with him in my arms. I returned to find some echo left behind, a scent ghost, a comfort that no longer comforted. A woman stood over the cradle, exhausted eyes shadowed, hands hovering helplessly above the wailing child. When she saw Cale, her shoulders sagged with something like relief and fear braided together. He will not stop, she whispered. He slept for a moment when I wrapped him in the wool, but then the scent faded and he woke again. I do not know what else to. Her gaze found me. Hope flickered there, sharp and desperate. Cale stepped aside. Let her, he said. For one heartbeat, the room held its breath. The cub in my arms, my cub, some stubborn corner of my heart insisted, lifted his head. His twin in the cradle stilled mid-cry, nose flaring. Then, with a sound that was almost a sob, the child in the cradle lurched toward the edge, tiny hands grasping air. Sarah! He choked. The cub in my arms answered with a high, desperate whine. I did not remember deciding to move, only that suddenly I was at the cradle, transferring the cub I'd carried into it and lifting the other out. We swapped them like matched halves of something broken, and the world clicked. The crying stopped. Just stopped. The cub pressed now against my chest, let out a trembling sigh, burrowing into the hollow beneath my chin. His body, strung tight as a bowstring moments before, went boneless with relief. Within heartbeats, his breathing steadied into the slow, even rhythm of true sleep. Silence rang louder than the wails had. I sagged onto the nearby rocking chair because my legs would not hold me upright. The woman, Cale's sister, I realized belatedly, seeing echoes of his features in hers, covered her mouth with her hand, shoulders shaking. "I tried," she whispered. "I held him. I sang. But he never—" "No one could," Cale said quietly. "Until now." He stood just inside the nursery door, one shoulder resting against the frame. His expression was complicated. Wonder, yes. Concern, absolutely. And something else, softer and more dangerous, threaded through both. He wasn't looking at the cub. He was looking at me. Under that gaze, the bond became a physical thing. I felt it as a thread of warmth stretching between my chest and the small body in my arms, humming faintly in time with his heartbeat. Not a mate bond, not the wild, overwhelming force the stories whispered about. This was different, gentler, but no less real. A healer's tether, perhaps, deepened by the way my radiance had soaked into him when death hovered close. "I don't understand," I admitted, stroking his fur with one hand as if we had done this all our lives. "But it is there." Cale pushed away from the door and crossed the room, every movement measured. "Will it hurt him?" he asked. "This bond?" I shook my head slowly. "No. If anything, it anchors him, gives him something to reach for when the world is too loud." "And you?" he asked. "Will it hurt you?" The question startled me more than it should. My magic might cost them, not what my magic might cost them, not what it already cost me. I bowed my head over the cub, breathing in the scent of fur and milk and faint wood smoke. "It will change things," I said. "I will feel when he is afraid, when he is hurt, when he is near. But pain?" I brushed my thumb over his tiny ear. "If this is pain, it is one I can bear." His sister exhaled shakily behind Cale. "Then he must stay close to her," she said. "We cannot ask him to survive without what keeps him calm." Cale nodded once, decision settling on his shoulders like a mantle. "Agreed." He turned to me. "You will need rooms near the nursery. Comfort, space, anything you require, you will have." The words made the room tilt. Rooms, plural. Space in a palace where every room meant something, signaled importance or lack of it. A place carved out in the heart of his home for an exiled healer with a tarnished name. "Cale," his sister began, alarm flickering over her face. "The council will—" "The council," he said, not raising his voice yet somehow silencing the air, "advises. I decide. My nephew lives today because Seraphine defied fear. She will not be punished for it in my house." Heat burned behind my eyes. I bent my head so neither of them would see. "You are not a prisoner," he added more quietly, addressing me now. "If you wish to leave when he is stronger, you may. But for as long as he needs you, I ask you to stay." Ask, not order. The distinction wrapped itself gently around the bruised places inside me. I looked up and met his gaze. Wonder still lived there, and concern, and something like respect. "I will stay," I said, voice rough, "for as long as he needs." He held my eyes a heartbeat longer, as if weighing the shape of those words. Then he inclined his head, not as a king accepting a pledge, but as a man acknowledging a choice. "Then welcome to the palace, Seraphine," he said softly. "We are in your debt." The cub sighed again, pressing closer, as if sealing a pact none of us yet fully understood. Outside, beyond the thick stone walls, the storm began to break, rain softening to a gentle patter against the windows. Inside, I sat within the circle of palace walls with a sleeping cub in my arms and a king who had just tethered me to his world as surely as my magic had tethered his nephew to me. For the first time since my exile, the future did not look like an empty road. It looked like a door that had just cautiously opened. The palace learned our rhythm faster than I did. By the end of the week, servants no longer stared outright when I crossed the corridors with the cub in my arms. They stepped around us with careful efficiency, pretending not to notice how his small nose tucked into the hollow of my throat, or how his ears pricked whenever Kale's footsteps sounded at the far end of the hall. Kale came often, sometimes in full leathers, smelling of rain and steel, fresh from the training grounds. Sometimes in soft shirts and ink-stained fingers, dragged away from ledgers by a nurse's frantic message that the cub was restless. Each time, his shoulders loosened a fraction when he stepped into the nursery and saw us there. Me in the rocking chair, the cub sprawled across my lap like a small, snoring king. "He has grown," Kale said one evening, dropping wearily into the chair opposite mine. Candlelight carved the hollows beneath his eyes into shadows. "You said that yesterday," I replied. "It was true yesterday," he said. "It is truer now." My magic was always bright. My magic was always bright, I began slowly. Even when I was small, I could knit cuts closed with a touch, ease fevers with a breath. At first they praised it, called me blessed. I let my fingers curl gently in the cub's fur, anchoring myself. Then an elder fell sick. His heart failed, his lungs filled. No tonic helped. No herb touched the rot eating him from inside. I remembered the smell of incense and sweat, the press of bodies around the bed. "They begged me to try," I said. I warned them it might be too late, that pulling him back would require more power than I had ever used. They insisted. So I reached. The memory burned behind my eyes. "The radiance answered," I whispered, "stronger than ever." It tore through me, poured into him. For a moment, I thought it would take us both. But he lived. He sat up, breathing easy, laughing, while everyone stared. Kale's voice was very soft. And then someone screamed. The sound still rang in my dreams, the high, ragged terror of those who had wanted a miracle, but not like this. "They said no healer should have that much power," I continued. "That if I could drag a man back from the brink, I could just as easily decide who should die. They said light that bright would draw attention from enemies, from spirits, from things beyond our borders." I tried to explain I had only answered their plea, that I hadn't meant to reach so far. But fear does not listen once it has found a target. I smiled without humor. The next night they called a council. They did not ask for my side. They declared me exiled before I could speak more than a sentence. The room blurred. I blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. "I left because staying would have meant shackles, or worse," I said. I told myself it was mercy, that at least this way they did not have to watch me. but the truth is simpler. I looked down at the cub, at the way his tiny paw had unconsciously come to rest against my wrist. They were afraid of what they did not understand, so they threw it into the woods and hoped it would not find its way back. Cale was silent long enough that I began to wish I had kept the story buried. Then his hand moved, resting lightly on the cub's back, his fingers a breath away from mine. "They were fools," he said. The certainty in his tone startled me into a laugh that sounded more like a sob. "You were not there," I said. "I know enough," he replied. "A council that would rather bury power than learn to work with it is a council that will always choose fear over growth." His jaw tightened. "I have sat through enough sessions this week to recognize the pattern." "You mean your council?" "Yes." He did not flinch from it. "They warned me daily that keeping you here invites trouble, that your former pack may use your exile as an excuse to question my judgment, that other alphas will whisper about a king enthralled by a dangerous healer." I stared at our almost touching hands. "And are you? Enthralled?" His mouth quirked. "Not in the way they mean." Heat crept up my neck. I was suddenly very aware of the narrowness of the bench, of the solid warmth of him on the other side of the sleeping cub. "They want me to send you away," he continued, "to thank you politely, escort you to the border, and wash our hands of the entire matter." A familiar dread rose, sour and sharp. "Will you?" He turned then, fully, so that there was nothing between his gaze and mine but candlelight and the soft rise and fall of his nephew's breathing. "No," he said. The word landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through every fear I had nursed since crossing his gates. "You are certain that is wise?" I asked, because someone in this palace ought to ask the question his counsel kept flinging at him. "Perhaps not," he admitted, "but it is right." His eyes darkened. "I will not abandon the person who saved my nephew, because frightened men are more loyal to protocol than to justice." My chest tightened, the ache a strange, swelling thing. "Kings have lost thrones for less," I murmured. "Then my throne is more fragile than I believed," he said. "If it cannot bear the weight of one act of gratitude, it is unworthy of the seat it stands on." He spoke with a calm that shook me more than any anger would have. There was no bravado in it, only a simple, unyielding choice. "This will cost you," I said. "Keeping me?" "Yes. So would sending you away." His gaze dropped briefly to the cub. "To him, most of all." The cub sighed in his sleep, as if agreeing. Cale's hand shifted, bridging the last inch to cover mine where it rested on soft fur. The contact was warm, steady, utterly deliberate. "You are not a burden to be managed, Seraphine," he said quietly. "You are a healer who did what no one else could. As long as I rule here, you will not stand alone against their whispers." His fingers squeezed mine once before he let go. Something warm and treacherous unfurled in my chest, spreading through the cracks exile had left. It was not the blazing rush of magic, but it was no less powerful. Trust, I realized, dazed, not demanded, not coerced, but offered. "Thank you," I said, because anything more would have broken my voice. He smiled then, small and tired and real. Get some rest, he murmured, rising. Both of you. Tomorrow I have 3 counselors to remind that fear is not law. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it is worth, he added, looking back, I am glad your pack made the mistake they did. I blinked. Glad? If they had not cast you out, he said simply, my nephew would be dead. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving me in the dim hush of the nursery, the cub's steady heartbeat thrumming under my hand, his fierce protection wrapped around me as tangibly as any cloak. For the first time since my exile, the weight on my shoulders felt shared. And in the quiet, something in me, small and cautious but very much alive, began to hope. The weeks that followed did not feel like falling in love. They felt like learning to breathe again. Mornings began with small paws in my ribs and a wet nose in my ear. The cub, Kale's nephew, though everyone simply called him Little Wolf for now, had decided my bed was his territory. If I tried to rise without him, he protested with wounded yips until I scooped him up and carried him to the nursery, where Kale usually waited. He was almost always there before us. Sometimes he sat on the floor in full armor, boots dusty from dawn patrol, a stack of reports forgotten at his side, as he let Little Wolf maul his gloved hands. Other mornings, he leaned against the window bench in a simple shirt, hair damp from a quick wash, watching the sky stained pink over the training fields. Good, he would say when we entered, expression easing. The court can wait. My most important appointment has arrived. You say that where they can hear you? I teased once, setting the cub down. Occasionally, he answered. It keeps their expectations manageable. We fell into a rhythm as natural as breathing. I measured out herbs and stitched bandages. He learned which salve stung and which did not by the set of the cub's ears. He showed me how to wrap a harness that would not chafe growing shoulders. I showed him how to recognize the subtle tremor that meant a nightmare was coming, so he could scoop Little Wolf up before the first cry. In the afternoons, when the cub napped in a patch of sunshine or dozed in my lap, Kale asked questions. Where does the radiance come from? He would ask, watching as I coaxed a faint glow into my palm to soothe a bruise. I don't know, I admitted, as I always did. It's like asking where breath comes from. It just is. And you cannot pull it for harm? His brow furrowed. Only for healing? I can choose what wound to reach for, I said. But when I try to twist it toward anything else, it refuses. It burns me instead. I turned my hand, showing him the faint white scar along my wrist. I learned that when I was young. He frowned at the mark as if offended on my behalf. Then whoever said your power makes you dangerous never bothered to ask how it works. No, I said softly. They never did. He listened, truly listened, as I laid bare every aspect of my craft. In return, he explained the intricacies of pack law, how treaties were woven like cloth, how one frayed thread could weaken the whole. The council fears what they cannot predict, he said one evening, as we watched Little Wolf tangle himself in a length of twine. I do not blame them for that, but I will not let fear be the only voice in the room. He proved it again and again. I heard the arguments sometimes, muffled through the council chamber doors when I passed. Words like precedent and risk and image floated out on sour air. Kale's voice cut through all of them, calm, implacable, refusing. Seraphine stays, he told them. This is not up for debate. I should have been frightened by how much of his reputation he was staking on me. Instead, a strange warmth took root behind my ribs, growing each time he chose the harder path. He did not lock me away. On days when the cub was settled and another nurse could soothe him, Kale took me beyond the palace walls. We walked through the market where vendors called greetings to their king and offered him bits of sugared bread or fresh fruit. He always shared them with me, and when possible, with the cub nestled in a sling against my chest. "This is Alara," he said, introducing me to the baker who tucked extra loaves into refugee baskets. "She keeps half my warriors from fainting on the training field." Alara wiped flour on her apron and offered me a warm, cautious smile. "If you keep His Majesty in one piece," she said, "you're welcome at my stall any time." We visited the healer's wing, where some stared at me with open curiosity, others with quiet respect. Kale did not force anyone's acceptance, but his presence at my side spoke volumes. "This is not a replacement," he told them as I walked through their wards, feeling the faint tug of their steady, trained magic. "She is another blade in our arsenal. Learn from her. Let her learn from you." Some did. They asked about my methods, my radiance, my limitations. I answered honestly. Little Wolf romped through the halls, stealing bandages and hearts with equal efficiency. In the evenings, we returned to the nursery, or sometimes to the small sitting room adjoining my new chambers. Little Wolf would sprawl across a pile of cushions, gnawing on a carved bone, while Kale and I reviewed herb inventories or discussed the latest council maneuver as if we'd been doing it for years. I began to see the man beneath the crown. He laughed more easily in private, a low, warm sound that made something in my chest loosen. He apologized when he snapped, and meant it. He listened to his people, truly listened, whether they were high-ranking advisors or stable hands worried about a sick mare. With the cub, he was nothing like the austere alpha king the court whispered about. He rolled on the floor, let Little Wolf chew on his hair, and made ridiculous growling noises that sent the child into fits of delighted yips. "He will never respect you if you let him win every wrestling match," I warned one night, as Kale lay on his back, feigning defeat while the cub stood triumphant on his chest. "He will respect that I know when to yield," Kale replied, eyes crinkling. "It is a skill many forget." I watched him then, the easy affection in his hands, the way his entire face softened when the cub swiped a wet tongue across his nose. Something shifted inside me, subtle but sure. Gratitude blurred into admiration. Admiration melted into something deeper, warmer, more dangerous. I found myself wondering what it would feel like to have those hands cup my face, to have that softened gaze turned on me alone. Then I would shove the thought away, scolding myself for daring such foolishness. He was a king. I was an exile he had chosen to shelter. No matter how often he dismissed titles in private, no matter how many times he assured me I belonged here, the gulf between us still yawned wide in my mind. I had watched alphas bend to his will in council chambers, had seen war-hardened warriors bow their heads when he passed. The idea of him choosing me for anything beyond my healing felt like a story whispered to comfort lonely girls, not a future I could claim. At night, when the palace lay quiet and Little Wolf snored at my feet, I lay awake and replayed small moments. Kale's hand closing over mine when a counselor's words cut too close. The way his gaze sought mine first when entering a room, as if checking I was still there. The one time his fingers brushed a stray curl from my face, entirely by accident, and both of us froze for a heartbeat too long. Each memory sent a ripple of heat through me, followed by a cold wash of doubt. He trusts you, I reminded myself. He respects you. That is already more than you ever expected. Wanting more feels greedy, unfair, dangerous. So I held that longing where I held the radiance, in the quiet hollow behind my ribs, where it could burn without consuming. I poured my days into the cub and my evenings into learning this kingdom's rhythms. I let Kale's presence become as familiar as the creak of the nursery rocking chair, as the soft padding of little Wolf's paws on stone. If my heart beat faster when his shoulder brushed mine, I told myself it was only the bond's sensitivity. If my gaze lingered on his mouth when he smiled, I blamed it on exhaustion. Yet sometimes, when the cub had finally collapsed between us in a tangle of limbs and the fire cast soft gold over Kale's profile, I caught an echo of my own conflict in his eyes, a question he was not yet willing to ask aloud. We were growing closer, step by cautious step, word by carefully chosen word. He was a king who had begun by protecting me out of duty, and now, perhaps, did so out of something more. I was a disgraced healer who had intended to stay only until a cub no longer needed her, yet found herself reading the day he would not. I told myself that when that day came, I would leave with grace. I did not yet know that grace has little to do with love, and even less with the choices fate was quietly arranging for us both. The summons arrived at dawn, tucked beneath my breakfast cup like a snake under a stone. By order of the High Council, it read in precise, unforgiving script. The healer, Seraphine, is requested to attend a formal inquiry regarding her continued presence within the royal palace. Requested, as if there were any choice. Little Wolf nosed the parchment, sneezed, and trotted off with a chunk of bread in his mouth, blissfully unconcerned. I envied him that. Kale found me in the nursery, the summons still folded in my hand. His eyes flicked to the seal, then to my face. They didn't even wait for the ink to dry, he muttered. You knew this was coming, I said. I did. He took the parchment, barely glancing at the words before tearing it cleanly in two. But they do not summon you. I do. And I asked you here long before they found the courage to put quill to paper. That courage now has teeth, I replied quietly. If I refuse to attend, they will say I have something to hide. His jaw worked, anger flickering like lightning behind his eyes. Then he exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders in a slow, controlled roll. Very well, he said. Then we go together. The council chamber was built to make wolves feel small. High ceilings arched overhead, painted with snarling wolves and blood-red moons. The long stone table curved in a half circle, council members seated like judges at some ancient trial. Banners of each allied pack hung behind them, their colors bright, their emblems severe. Whispers rippled through the room as Kale and I entered side by side. That's her. Look at the mark on her wrist. Lightbearer, they called her before they cast her out. I felt each word like grit against my skin. Little Wolf, forbidden from the chamber, waited with Kale's sister in the hallway beyond. I could feel his faint restlessness through the bond, a muffled pacing at the edge of my thoughts. At the center of the curved table sat Lord Corvus, spine straight as a spear. Your Majesty, he said, bowing his head, thank you for honoring our request for counsel. This is not counsel, Kale replied, taking his place at the head of the room. This is a hearing you wish to hold about a woman who can hear every word you say about her. A few counselors shifted uneasily. Corvus's expression did not change. We are concerned, he said simply. It is our duty to bring those concerns to you and to her. His gaze pinned me, cool and sharp. Seraphine, formerly of the Thornhaven pack, he began, voice ringing against stone. We have heard many stories about you, that your magic is untested and unstable, that your former pack exiled you for practices they deemed dangerous. that your influence over both the young prince and our king is unusual." A murmur of agreement rolled through the chamber. "We are charged with the safety of this kingdom," another counselor added. "We cannot ignore an unknown variable in its heart." Unknown variable. I felt my fingers curl against my skirts. Cale's voice cut across the swell of whispers. "She is not a variable," he said. "She is a person. You will remember that when you speak of her in my presence." Corvus inclined his head, acknowledging the rebuke without retreating. "Then let us speak plainly," he said. "We question whether it is wise to allow a healer with her history unrestricted access to our future heir, or to you." He left hanging the accusation they didn't quite dare voice, that I might be twisting Cale's choices with the same radiance I used to heal. Cale's gaze slid to me, asking silently for patience. I nodded once. If he was willing to fight for me, I could at least give him the space to do it. "Let us examine your concerns," he said, returning his attention to the table, one by one. He stepped down from the raised dais, not looming above them but standing among them, hands clasped loosely behind his back. "You say her magic is unproven," he began. "Yet you sit in a fortress whose east wall still bears scorch marks from the last war, when enemy fire broke through our defenses, whose herbs kept our wounded from fever. Lyra, the baker's daughter, now apprenticed in the healer's wing, who trained her to recognize infection before it took hold?" Lyra rose from a bench along the side wall, cheeks flushing. She hadn't told me she'd been summoned. "Seraphine did," she said, voice trembling but clear. "She showed me how to brew the draught that saved half the wounded guards in the outer ward." "If her methods were unstable," Cale continued, "would we have fewer graves today or more?" Silence. No one rushed to answer. "As for her exile," Cale went on, "we have only one side of that tale, the side of those who cast her out. I have heard the other. A healer begged to perform a miracle, punished when she succeeded too well. That is her account." "That is her account," Corvus said. "We cannot verify. Can we not?" Cale's tone sharpened. "We have traders who passed through her homeland. Records of their elders' sudden recovery. Rumors of fear, yes, but not of harm. No tales of patients killed, of magic misused. Only of a council frightened by what they did not control." He gestured to the chamber doors. "If you doubt her skill, ask the farmers whose sick children now run through the fields because she chose to treat them, though they had nothing to pay. Ask the stable master whose mare would have died foaling if not for her radiance. They are here." I turned, startled, to see faces I recognized in the gallery above. A farmer couple, the stable master, 2 guards whose shattered ribs I had mended. They had dressed in their best clothes, hands twisted together, eyes bright and nervous. "I called for character witnesses," Cale said. "Not from courts or councils, but from those whose lives have changed because she was here. Do you wish to hear them?" It was not really a question. Still, protocol demanded the council murmur agreement. One by one, they spoke. "She didn't ask whose pack I'd been born into," the stable master said. "Only what hurt." "My daughter had been sick for weeks," the farmer's wife whispered. "Our own healer did what he could, but the fever wouldn't break. Seraphine sat up all night with her, hand on her brow, and by morning the fever was gone." "She heals even the ones who glare at her," one of the guards said, casting a wry glance at a scowling counselor. "Does it matter where she comes from if my lungs can hold air again?" Their words tightened my throat. I gripped the edge of my sleeve, forcing myself to stay still. When their testimonies faded, Corvus folded his hands. "No one disputes she has been useful," he said. "But usefulness is not the same as safety. You cannot deny that the bond between her and your nephew is unprecedented. If she were to leave—" "She hasn't," Cale said, "and she won't, until he no longer needs her. That is her choice, not mine." His gaze swept the table. "You fear that I am compromised by gratitude, that I see her through the eyes of a man whose family was nearly broken, not as a king weighing risk." He took a step closer to their half-circle, and his voice dropped. "Let me be very clear," he said. "I have weighed it. I have considered every argument you made before you found the courage to speak them aloud. And still I say this: sending her away would be the greater danger." "How?" another counselor demanded. "Explain that, sire." "If we cast out a healer who saved our heir, what message does that send to the Pax?" Cale asked. "That we value fear over loyalty? That anyone who shows unusual strength will be punished, not guided? How many gifts will be buried rather than honed? How many allies will look at this palace and see not justice, but cowardice dressed in velvet?" No one answered. "And there is this," he added. "My nephew lives. He laughs. He will grow because she chose to break a vow that never should have been required of her. Any kingdom that cannot find room in its heart for that miracle is not one I wish to rule." A flush crept up Corvus's neck. "You place great weight on one woman," he said. Cale's eyes cooled. "I place great weight on my own judgment," he corrected, "which, as you seem to require reminding, is what you are here to advise, not to replace." The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of unease down the table. "If you say she stays," Corvus said carefully, "we will obey. But we must be able to question." "You may question policies, strategies, even my temper on a bad day," Cale interrupted. "You do not question whether I understand whom I invite under my roof. When you imply that I have been ensnared, misled, or otherwise fooled, you are not merely insulting her, you are insulting me. And that," he said softly, "I will not tolerate." The room went very, very still. I watched him then, not as a healer, not as an exile, but as a woman seeing a man choose where to stand when lines were drawn. He did not look at me as he spoke. He didn't need to. His defense did not rely on my reaction. It was rooted in his own sense of right. Corvus bowed his head, the movement stiff. "Forgive us, sire," he said. "Our concern outstripped our trust. We did not mean to undermine your authority." "Yet you did," Cale replied. "Let this be the last time you attempt to protect this kingdom by tearing down those who have risked themselves for it." His gaze swept the table one final time. "Seraphine stays," he said. "She will continue to care for my nephew and assist our healers. Any who attempt to harass or isolate her will answer to me directly. Are we clear?" One by one, the counselors nodded, some grudgingly, some with genuine acceptance. Corvus's nod was the smallest, but it was there. "Then this hearing is over," Cale concluded. He turned, his eyes finding mine at last.